A couple years ago, I was living in a fairly nice apartment in downtown Memphis, working as an ophthalmic technician. Like any other day, I came home from work around 4:30 p.m., unlocked the door, and stepped inside. I dropped my phone, wallet, and keys on the kitchen island as the heavy metal door slammed shut behind me, echoing through the apartment. I slipped into my usual routine, which was tackling a few errands around the house. Growing up in a small town had left me with one habit I hadn't shaken. I rarely locked the door during the day. My husband would be home soon, so I told myself, why bother? I've never once forgotten to lock a door since this day. Anyways, that day, I walked into the bathroom and into my large walk-in closet to hang up the laundry I had started earlier that morning. That's when I heard my front door opening. I smiled, thinking my husband was home early. "I'm in here, love," I called out, cheerful and unsuspecting. But there was no reply, only silence. And in that silence came a creeping dread that something was wrong. My smile faded, but I told myself maybe he just hadn't heard me. I stepped out into the living room and froze. On the other side of the kitchen island stood a complete stranger. He was a man, maybe in his 50s, though the exact features blur in my memory. He just stood there, staring. No mask, no weapon, just watching me. For a second, I thought maybe he'd walked into the wrong apartment and would mutter an apology, but he didn't. He simply stared. I straightened my posture, I puffed out my chest, which was an unconvincing attempt at looking intimidating, and barked at him to get out. My voice was loud and sharp, but he ignored me completely. Instead, he calmly reached for my belongings, such as my phone, my keys, my wallet. Then he slid them into his pockets one by one, like he had all the time in the world. That's when the truth hit me. This man wasn't confused. He was dangerous. I lunged for the only thing left that could connect me to the outside world, which was my computer. It meant moving closer to him, but I figured I had just enough distance, about 12 to 15 feet, to grab it and run. I snatched it and sprinted toward the bathroom, heart hammering in my chest. It was the only place I could double lock myself in. The bathroom door slammed shut behind me and I twisted the lock. Seconds later, he was at the door, rattling the knob, pushing. I bolted into the closet, locking that door too, trembling as I opened my laptop. On Facebook Messenger, I fired off frantic messages to my husband, begging him to call 911. He replied within minutes that he was on the phone with dispatch and already on his way home. So I waited. The bathroom door creaked open, which means he was inside. The only thing that separates us now is one flimsy closet door. He twisted the knob, jiggled it, pressed against it, and I did nothing. I didn't scream, didn't cry out, didn't search for a weapon, though the laptop in my hands or half the things in that closet could have worked. I simply sat there, paralyzed, convinced I was about to die. Miraculously, the door held. I heard his angry footsteps retreat, then the crash of glass, the slam of cabinets, the sound of drawers being yanked open, contents flung everywhere. I sat frozen, tears streaming silently, too terrified to move. I messaged my mom, who was 15 hours away by car, and told her what was happening. I told her how much I loved her and begged her to tell my brothers I loved them too. She kept sending me messages, pleading with me to keep replying, and I did, between gasps of fear and resignation. Then his voice mumbling outside the closet door, garbled words I couldn't make out. I prayed the police would get there before my husband, terrified he'd walk into something horrific. Then all of a sudden, the front door opened again. This time, it was my husband. He shouted for me, but the intruder rushed towards him, and I burst out of the closet to see the two of them on the floor, with my husband pinning the man down. The stranger thrashed and muttered, sometimes yelling but never truly resisting. The scene spun around me in a dizzy blur. The police arrived about 25 agonizing minutes after the 911 call. It felt like an eternity. They recovered my things from his pockets, hauled him out, and took my statement. An officer told me I should always keep my door locked, and at the time it felt like blame. Later I realized it was experience speaking. He'd likely seen nights like this end far worse. In less than half an hour, the worst moment of my life had ended. But the fear stayed. The sense of violation stayed. The awareness stayed that if it could happen once, it could happen again. For a year, the nightmares kept me awake, even after my husband and I moved to a small Midwestern town with a safe apartment complex on the 3rd floor. One entrance only. Crime statistics nearly non-existent. Still, I couldn't sleep when my husband worked nights. I realized it wasn't just fear of the past, it was fear of being unprepared. Hi, My name is Tiff, and this is my horror story about a night I was home alone. I was 21 when it happened, and even now, more than a year later, I still can't shake it. My family had just moved to a small rural town, far quieter and more isolated than where we'd lived before. The new house was a sprawling ranch-style place with a basement. My parents left for a week to celebrate their anniversary with friends hours away, leaving me home alone. The first few days passed without trouble. I kept in touch with my parents over Facebook, as they were fine, having fun, and I felt secure enough. Every night before bed, I made sure all the doors were locked. I knew the house well by then. One front door, a sliding glass door at the back porch, and another that connected the garage and basement to the rest of the house. From my bedroom, you could look straight across the house to the kitchen, living room, dining area, and see the basement stairs. It was around 11 p.m. one night when the unease crept in. I was lying in bed with the glow of my computer lighting the room when this heavy sense of dread hit me. It felt like eyes were on me. The summer heat was brutal, so I had a big box fan lodged in my window, drawing in the night air. But with that feeling pressing down on me, I decided to pull it out, shut the window, lock it, and draw the curtain. That should have made me feel safer, but it didn't. Minutes later, I froze at the faint sound of a light, deliberate scratching. I told myself it had to be an animal. After all, we lived surrounded by trees with neighbors not too far away. Maybe it was a stray dog? The sound stopped, and I almost convinced myself I was right. Almost. Because then I heard footsteps. Slow, steady footsteps going down into the basement. Panic instantly gripped me. There was no phone in the house, and my own cell phone was broken. In order to leave, I'd have to walk right past the basement stairs. I considered the window, but my room was high off the ground, so that means jumping could lead to a sprained ankle or a broken bone. It was too risky if I needed to run. So I did the only thing I could. I eased open my bedroom door slowly and peeked out, hoping for a clear path to the front door. My eyes strained in the dark until they adjusted, but then I saw something. It was a shape. No, it was a man. Not standing, not climbing, but crawling up the basement stairs. He was crawling like some nightmare creature. I felt my stomach turn, and I slipped back into my room, locking the door as quietly as I could. My heart was pounding so hard I thought he'd hear it. My only option now was the window. As I fumbled with the screen, I heard the handle of my door jiggle. Then, in a sing-song voice, he whispered,
"I know you are in there."
Followed by a laugh that made my blood run cold. He threw himself against the door, rattling the hinges. I ripped the screen free and hurled myself out the window. Pain shot up my ankle as I landed wrong, but the adrenaline drove me forward. I sprinted barefoot across the yard, banging on my neighbor's door, slamming the bell, screaming for help. When I dared to look back at my house, he was there, standing in my window, waving at me. Eventually, my neighbors opened their door, pulled me inside, and called the police. When officers searched the house, they found the lock on the basement door had been picked. My bedroom door was nearly off its hinges, but the man was gone. Nothing had been stolen. Nothing had been moved. It was as if he'd come there only to watch. To this day, I don't know who he was or what he wanted, but sometimes late at night, I still hear the phantom sound of scratching on my walls. It was the middle of summer, and my parents had taken off for the weekend to our place in Cape Cod. It's only about a 2-hour drive, so leaving me home alone for a few days was no big deal. My mom had left me pulled pork and pasta to heat up whenever I wanted, plus some cash in case I felt like ordering pizza. Everything was chill. That first night, I stayed up until 3 in the morning playing Xbox, so I didn't crawl out of bed until well past 1 the next afternoon. I had plans to meet some friends for street hockey at 3, so I dragged myself into the shower, still half asleep. Here's the thing, I take long showers. Really long. And when my parents aren't home, I go all out. This one lasted about 45 minutes, mostly because I was on my phone scrolling through Reddit and Twitter. That's when I heard it. Our back door opened. The bathroom sits directly above that door, and it's an old, heavy one, so the sound of it opening and closing is distinct. I froze instantly as I was supposed to be alone. My ears strained for any follow-up noise. 2 minutes passed. Nothing. I told myself it was probably the wind. Or maybe my parents came home early. Turning off the shower, I wrapped a towel around myself and slowly started down the stairs. The staircase to the kitchen is narrow, enclosed by walls, and is tight enough that you can't see into the kitchen until you're almost at the bottom. Every step creaked in the silence, but I moved as quietly as I could, taking nearly a minute to descend 12 stairs. By the time I reached the second to last step, my heart was pounding. I reminded myself how ridiculous I was being, as if someone had come in. Surely I'd have heard them moving. I chuckled under my breath, trying to shake off the nerves, and stepped into the kitchen. That's when I saw him. A man stood 2 feet away from me, perfectly still, staring directly into my eyes with a wide, unnatural smile. The thing that seared itself into my memory wasn't his face. It was his arms. They weren't at his sides like normal. They were twisted, rotated unnaturally outward and back. I swear my heart nearly stopped, and instinct took over before fear could. I instantly stepped forward and punched him as hard as I could in the jaw, sort of half slapping and pushing him towards the ground. As he stumbled back, I bolted up the stairs and my towel slipped off and landed somewhere in the kitchen. I slammed my bedroom door shut and shoved a chair under the knob, just like in the movies. My hands shook as I dialed 911, voice cracking as I told the operator what happened. And then, the light under my door disappeared. He was standing right outside. I couldn't move. I couldn't even bring the phone to my mouth. The shadow beneath the door shifted ever so slightly, like he was leaning in, listening. The operator kept asking, "Sir, are you there?" But I didn't dare make a sound. Eventually, the shadow pulled away. I heard the faint creak of footsteps retreating down the hall, and after minutes passed, I heard banging on the front door. It was the voices of the police that had arrived. I opened my bedroom door to find 2 officers standing there. The relief hit so hard I nearly cried. To this day, my parents haven't left me home alone again. I lock every door and window before bed. Sometimes I still dream about him. That twisted posture, that smile. The police never found him, no matter how many sketches or lineups we went through. And the thought that he might still be out there, and that maybe one night I'll look outside and see him standing under a street lamp, smiling, makes my skin crawl. I must have been about 8 years old when this happened, and my sister was around 12 or 13. We lived in a small, run-down house we called the Shack, which was the place our mom moved us into after splitting up with our dad, as it was all she could afford. My sister and I shared a cramped bedroom, but the one saving grace of that house was the huge backyard, complete with an above-ground pool and a deck we practically lived on. A tall privacy fence surrounded the yard, and being the nosy kid I was, I often climbed the wooden planks to peek over at the neighbors. From there, I spotted the 2 little boys who lived kitty-corner to us as they went to my school. It quickly became a habit of mine to climb up and talk to them every day, but never climbing over, just high enough to hang on the fence and chat. They had an uncle named Randy, probably in his mid-20s to 30s, who was usually out back doing yard work. Over time, both my sister and I got used to chatting with him too. At the time, he seemed like a perfectly nice guy. Looking back now, the red flags were obvious. I remember one day he tossed a basketball accidentally over our fence. My sister and I offered to grab it, but he waved us off and insisted on getting it himself. Without hesitation, he vaulted the fence with ease. Back then, we thought nothing of it, but now I realize he was probably testing how quickly he could scale that barrier. One afternoon, in what seemed like casual conversation, my sister mentioned that our mom worked the night shift. That single piece of information was all he needed, as not long after, everything changed. I woke in the middle of the night to the sound of my sister crying. We shared a bunk bed, so I was on the bottom. When I looked up, she was leaning against the wall with the phone pressed to her ear, tears streaming down her face. I asked what was wrong, but she brushed me off, told me everything was fine, and urged me to go back to sleep. So I did. It wasn't until the next morning that I learned the truth. While our mom was away at work, Randy had jumped the fence and tried to break into our house. He began by pounding on our bedroom window, demanding that my sister let him in. When she refused, he circled the house, banging on every window, rattling every door, yelling for her to open up. That's when she finally got out of bed, dialed 911, and tried to stay calm. Somehow, unbelievably, I had slept through the entire ordeal, even though, according to her, he was slamming on the window right beside my bed. By the time the cops arrived, Randy had already hopped back over the fence into his yard. They knocked on his door, but he denied everything. With no proof, the police said there was nothing they could do. The incident shook us to the core. Since our mom couldn't change her work schedule, she began sending us to stay at our dad's place at night. Years went by without further problems, and eventually we thought it was over. I stopped talking to the boys next door, and Randy faded into the background. But then it happened again. And yes, I slept through the entire thing a second time. By then, my sister was older and had invited several friends over for a sleepover. They were gathered in the living room near the sliding glass door that opened to the backyard. The door had vertical blinds, but One slat had broken weeks earlier, leaving a small gap. The girls were sitting around the couch playing board games when suddenly, one of them froze. Her voice was tight as she whispered, "Guys, don't freak out, but there's a guy standing at your sliding glass door." All eyes turned toward the glass, and there he was, Randy, with his face pressed against the window, staring through the gap in the blinds, watching them in silence. Panic erupted. The girls screamed, and someone dialed 911. And just like before, Randy vaulted the fence and slipped back into his yard. When police arrived, they described his clothes, and sure enough, he answered the door wearing the exact same outfit. Yet again, he denied everything, and again, the cops claimed there wasn't enough evidence. That was it for us. We moved out shortly after and filed for a restraining order. Randy never showed up to court, so the judge automatically granted it, and we never saw him again. Years later, curiosity got the best of me, and I looked him up. Sure enough, he's now in prison on a slew of random charges. Nothing related to minors, surprisingly, but at least he's locked away where he belongs.